Unfair school funding puts hundreds of thousands of children in schools in the north at a disadvantage compared with youngsters in London. That is according to a major report out today. It reveals at primary school level, the north of England receives around £4,600 per pupil in grant funding, about the national average, but it's £900 less than in London. And at secondary level, the north receives around £5,700 per pupil, which is £100 less than the English average and £1,300 less than London. More money should be redistributed to the north to bridge a growing north-south divide in academic standards, according to the study by the Institute for Public Policy Research North and Teach First, a national charity. Well, we can talk now to James Westhead, who is director at Teach First, which compiled the report. Also, Sir Michael Wilshaw, the chief inspector at Ofsted. Louise Kelly's daughter is in a secondary school in the northeast. Tarun Kapur runs the Dean Trust. It's a group of academy schools in the northwest. We've also got an entrepreneur and business owner, Claire Young, who not only recruits from schools in the north, but her company also works with schools across the country. And head teacher Adria Nisha took over a special measures school in Bradford. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to come to you first of all, James, because you've been involved in this research, obviously. 55% of pupils in the north of England get 5 A to C grade GCSEs versus 61% in London. We were just hearing about the funding discrepancy.
Yes.
Is that why?
Yes, what we found in this report, looking at all the data across the north and around the country, is that there is a real divide in education between the north and the south, and in particular with London. And if we're looking at creating a northern powerhouse, bringing together cities, investing in industry and infrastructure and transport, then what this report suggests is we also need to invest in education. And that divide that you're describing is starkest when you look at children from the poorest backgrounds. There, children in the north are starting out behind other children in the rest of the country, and in particular London, when they start at school, and they're leaving even further behind. Now, we don't think that's right. That's a waste of potential on a very large scale.
So tell us more about the issues behind it. I mean, on the funding, why is it like that? And are other factors coming into play when you look at the educational performance in north versus south?
So yeah, there is a divide both in the outputs that we're describing, but also in the inputs. So in the inputs to schools, in terms of funding, in terms of staffing, in terms of wider resources. So roughly speaking, a secondary school gets in the north of England roughly £1,300 per pupil less than a secondary school.
But why is that?
It's historic, it's also related to need, it's related to a whole bunch of factors. The government is now reviewing the funding of schools nationally and creating what it calls a fairer funding formula. And what we're suggesting is that we should really look very carefully at the need of schools, both in terms of the sort of prior attainment of pupils and also the challenges that the schools are in, and consider redistributing funds.
OK, well, let's get the view of a parent. Louise Kelly, you've got a 13-year-old daughter in a school described as inadequate. What is her and your experience of the school?
It's just basically she just seems to... She goes in and she doesn't know who she's going to have, what day. The supply teachers are there for maybe one lesson, 2 lessons, then it's another one, the next week. I mean, for instance, I actually asked her last night, because she currently has a supply teacher for maths. I says, how long have you had this supply teacher for? And she said ages. And as it turns out, ages is actually only 2 weeks. I mean, there's no consistency or anything, and so the schools just can't seem to get teachers in on a permanent basis, and it's just she's fallen behind. She's struggling with her maths. When she was at primary school, she was always like the top, and now in secondary school, because they don't seem to have the teachers there like on a long-term basis, she's fallen behind. And it just seems to be a big issue within the school. It's not just with maths, it's other subjects she's had supply teachers for as well.
OK, well, let's talk to a headmaster, Adria Nisha. You're a head teacher at a school in Bradford that was in special measures. When you hear that, does that sound like a familiar picture? Is it hard to attract good teachers?
Well, it is, you know. The situation at Carlton Bowling is different to which other schools, so it is representative generally of schools in the north, and especially ones which are in special measures or requires improvement. you know, you're in a downward spiral. How do you attract good staff? It's hard for any school, but if you're in special measures in an area which is deemed to be difficult, probably difficult behaviour, it is hard to attract them. Now, we as a school at Kelton Bolling, we're lucky in that we've got a good reputation behaviour, small class sizes, we look after staff, so we've got a very good reputation in the city, even when we're in special measures, so we never had those problems. But yes, what was represented there by the parent is a fair representation overall.
So Michael Wilshaw, you've spoken before about your concerns about a north-south divide. How do you identify the problem and the impact it might have in the long run?
Well, this is a secondary school issue. Primary schools in the Midlands and the North are doing as well as primary schools in London and the South. And in fact, if you look at a place like Redcar in Cleveland in the North East, a place which has gone through some very hard times with the closure of the steelworks, primary schools there are doing better than primary schools in London, which are high.
Where's the disconnect then? What's going on?
So we shouldn't get obsessed with the funding issue. That's an issue that's going to be addressed through the national funding formula that the government's going to introduce over the next
so it
year,
will
year or
equalise
two.
the money.
But the secondary schools, primary school children are doing well, but when they transfer to secondary schools, in many parts of the Midlands and the north of England, they are doing badly, very badly. Something like 2/3 of the schools in special measures are in the north and in the Midlands.
Why
the
do you think that
16
is,
worst
then?
local authorities are in the north and the Midlands for secondary school performance. Well, I think part of it is just low expectations. And the lessons of London, because London has not always been a good performer. I'm an ex-London teacher. I'm an ex-London head. I've worked in London in the 70s and 80s and 90s when standards were terrible. What changed London was political will of local political leaders who said this is enough, and also good head teachers coming into London and showing what could be done. And if we're going to turn around the fortunes of secondary schools in the Midlands and the north of England, we need that essential combination.
Who's got the low expectations? Not the parents, not the teachers, presumably up there.
Not the parents, but head teachers are critical. Absolutely critical. And what we need are great head teachers in the Midlands and the north of England who know what to do, have high expectation and can transform their schools.
Tarun, you run an academy chain with 6 schools in the pipeline. In Knowsley, you've got some schools, that's one of the worst performing areas. How do you respond to what Sir Michael Wilshaw is saying about low expectations and his analysis of what the issues are?
Well, first of all, the issue of fair funding is one that's being addressed, so I would put that on one side, and we have 3 local authorities we're working with, and each local authority funds us differently, so that's a challenge in itself. I tend to agree that aspirations and high expectations is something that, and a traditional way of working is what is necessary in schools. We've moved into Knowsley, we've worked alongside local primary schools, we've raised the aspirations of all the families and the children to ensure that actually you can do something. We've linked in with businesses as well, because businesses are constantly saying you're not preparing children. Well, we're asking them now, what do you want us to do to prepare children for jobs that sometimes don't exist at the moment? So it is right, we do need to follow the London model. I think that was very successful, having the best people leading the schools. But I would say, echoing what the parents said, getting maths teachers, English teachers is not easy in very difficult areas, or areas that are perceived to be difficult, because teachers would say, why should we work there? With us, they'll come and work for our trust, they trust us, and they'll go and work in those areas and say, actually, this is great.
Claire, you run a company that sends speakers, motivational speakers, into school. Interestingly, schools in London engage you more to send people into schools there compared with schools in the north. Why do you think that is?
I think, not repeating comments which other people have said, but I do find when we're working with London schools, the students have got much greater aspirations, they're very savvy, they're much more aware of the real world, so to speak, and the skills which are needed to succeed. They seem to know about the cost of living, they have greater career aspirations. It is a shame for somebody who, I live in Yorkshire, my office is based in Wakefield, I'm very proud of the North, and it is frustrating when you do see the low expectations which have been mentioned, and I think it does come down to having strong leadership, having these superb heads who have got visions, stories, will take the students and the staff, which is very important, bringing those fantastic teachers in to really make the difference, the revolution which is needed.
James, you want to comment?
Well, just building on what's been said so far, I mean, Teach First is a charity which recruits high-performing teachers to work in schools, and we work with about several hundred schools across the north, and our experience is that there are amazing teachers and amazing head teachers. But this education is at bottom a people business. That people is what is going to drive success and performance. So all the speakers are absolutely right. We've got to invest in teachers, we've got to invest in head teachers in schools in the north if we're to stand a chance of closing this divide, which is a very real one, which will hold the north back in the future unless we do something about it now.
Louise, you're a mum. What do you think when you hear this conversation around expectation and aspiration, and hear the different comparisons between how schools in the north are funded and the results that are being produced?
Well, personally, I think the money spent in schools on each pupil should be the same across the country. There shouldn't be this gap, because the cost of resources to buy things that you need obviously to successfully teach is going to be the same across the country. There shouldn't be such a huge difference in what you're spending on children, on education, because these children, they are the country's future. They're going to be the ones that are going to go out into the workforce. And everything, and to have this huge just difference, it's sort of basically it's writing off the children. They're not worth it. That's in my personal opinion.
Thank you. I just want to bring in a couple of comments from viewers. Ronald has tweeted to say governments always publicly say sums of money for education but don't say how many schools and the criteria for getting funding. And Keith has tweeted to say there's not a north-south divide in Ofsted gradings. Just briefly, is that correct, Sir Michael Wilshaw?
There are definite differences between the north and the south at secondary level. As I said to you, if you look at the special measures at the schools that are failing in the country, 175, I think, are failing in the country. 2/3 of them are in the north of England and in the Midlands. And the big challenge is secondary school performance in the north and the Midlands. I was in Liverpool last week, and I spoke to two outstanding head teachers and the mayor of Liverpool. They understand what needs to be done. And they have a better chance of recruiting good teachers because they're running good schools.
Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you for your comments. Do get in touch if you've got any more thoughts on that. We did speak to the Department for Education, who told us at the heart of our education reforms is the mission of ensuring that every child receives an excellent education that enables them to fulfil their potential regardless of circumstances or geography. We are making progress with 1.4 million more children in good or outstanding schools compared with 2010, and the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers falling. We will provide £20 million a year of new funding through our Northern Powerhouse Schools strategy, and have commissioned an in-depth review to understand the factors underpinning underperformance in the north.